On their wedding anniversary, Ryan discovers that his wife, Emily, didn't come home but instead worked out with another man. As he secretly follows and records their intimate conversation, Emily's betrayal is fully exposed. Torn between rage and sorrow, Ryan confronts her, knowing deep down that there's no turning back. My wife, Emily, is a night shift nurse. She is beautiful, with a long and slender figure, and her legs are incredibly long. When she wears her nurse's uniform, it's almost irresistible. Lately, she's been coming home late every night and leaving early in the morning, barely letting me touch her. Today is our 3rd wedding anniversary, and I prepared a special dinner for us, hoping we could celebrate. But even after I set the table and waited for hours, Emily still hadn't come home. By the time I checked the clock again, it was already past 10:30 p.m. A creeping suspicion started to gnaw at me. Could she be cheating on me? The thought alone made my stomach churn. Trying to keep calm, I grabbed my phone and dialed her number. The phone rang for a long time before she finally picked up. "Hey, are you off work? I asked you to come home early today. It's our anniversary," I said, my voice tense. "I'm at the gym with Kate. I'll be home soon," she replied, her voice interrupted by heavy breathing. That sound, it felt eerily similar to the way she breathed when we were intimate. My heart sank. I forced myself to ask, "Did you forget it's our 3rd anniversary?" "Oh no, honey, I didn't forget. It's just been a really long day." Her voice was hurried, and then she hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling a cold wave of unease wash over me. The table in front of me, filled with untouched food, seemed like a mockery of my efforts. I sat on the couch and waited. Hours passed. It was almost a.m. when Emily finally walked through the door. "Why are you so late? I asked you to come home early tonight. What's going on? And why didn't you pick up my calls?" I demanded, my voice harsher than I intended. Emily kicked off her shoes and slumped onto the couch, exhaustion written all over her face. "Come on, we've been married for 3 years. Do we really need to celebrate every anniversary?" Kate dragged me to the gym, and I couldn't say no. I looked at her, feeling torn. On one hand, I knew how tough night shifts could be, especially for nurses. But on the other hand, something just didn't feel right. I pushed down my frustration. "We hardly spend time together anymore. Today was important, you know. I'm really tired. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" she said, standing up and heading for the bathroom. I grabbed her wrist before she could leave. "Don't you think you owe me a little something for missing dinner?" I murmured. She brushed my hand away. "I just finished working out, and I'm all sweaty. Let's not do this now." I leaned in, kissing her neck as my hands roamed across her body. But then I froze. My fingers had slid under her shirt, and I realized she wasn't wearing any underwear. "Where's your bra?" I asked, frowning. "It's in my bag. I wore a sports bra at the gym and didn't feel like putting it back on afterward," she answered casually. Her explanation seemed reasonable, but something still felt off. Trying not to overthink it, I checked her bag, and sure enough, her bra was there. Relieved, but still uncertain, I tried to relax. We ended up getting intimate on the couch, but afterward, she quickly excused herself to the bathroom. As she locked the door behind her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Was she really just tired? Or was there something more going on that I wasn't seeing? The next day, I couldn't shake off the strange feeling from the night before. Emily had left for work again, as she always did on her night shifts, but I couldn't stop thinking about the strange behavior she'd been showing for the past few weeks. That evening, I decided to surprise her at the hospital. It was raining heavily outside, and as I looked at the umbrella stand near the door, I noticed Emily hadn't taken hers with her. Worried about her walking back home in the storm, I grabbed her umbrella and drove to the hospital. By the time I arrived, the rain had intensified, pounding against the windshield. I parked the car and rushed into the hospital, heading toward the 3rd-floor nurses' station where Emily worked. But when I arrived, I didn't see her anywhere. A nurse named Olivia, one of the new hires, came out of a patient's room and noticed me standing there. "Dr. Ryan, are you here to see Emily?" she asked, surprised to see me. "Yes, I brought her an umbrella. Is she busy with a patient?" Olivia blinked, looking confused. "Oh, didn't Emily tell you? She swapped her shift tonight. She's not working here today." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I forced a smile and nodded as if I had forgotten, but inside, my mind was racing. Why hadn't she told me about switching shifts? Where was she, if not at the hospital? You have read so much. Don't forget to subscribe and like." Of course, she did. I must have forgotten. I lied, handing the umbrella to Olivia. "You should keep this. It's pouring outside." "Thank you, Dr. Ryan," Olivia replied, her face brightening as she took the umbrella. I left the hospital with a storm of emotions brewing inside me, far more turbulent than the weather outside. Driving home, I tried to think rationally. Maybe she simply forgot to mention it. Maybe she was out with friends. Maybe, but each thought only deepened my suspicions. Back at home, I couldn't sleep. My mind was consumed with doubts and insecurities. I had to know the truth. Around am, I heard the sound of heels clicking against the floor outside the apartment. It was Emily. She had finally come home. I stayed silent, watching her through a crack in the bedroom door. She didn't have an umbrella with her, yet her clothes weren't wet. That meant someone had driven her home. I felt my hands balling into fists, trying to control the surge of anger building inside me. As she quietly slipped into bed, I stayed awake, pretending to sleep. In the middle of the night, her phone vibrated on the bedside table. I reached for it before she could notice. There was a message from an unknown number. "Sorry about yesterday. I'll buy you a new set of lingerie. I hope you like these." Attached were photos of provocative lingerie I had never seen Emily wear before. My blood ran cold. She had told me the stain on her bra was from spilling oatmeal, but now it all made sense. The white mark wasn't food, it was something else entirely. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the message again, gripping her phone tightly in my hands. I quickly glanced over at Emily, who was still asleep, and tried to unlock her phone to read more, but the password had changed. We always shared our passwords. It was a sign of trust in our relationship. When had she changed hers, and why? Unable to read more of the conversation, I placed the phone back on the table, my mind racing with thoughts. Who is sending her these messages? And how long had this been going on? The rest of the night was torture. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, consumed by doubt and betrayal. The following morning, I woke up feeling utterly drained, both physically and emotionally. My suspicions about Emily had grown, but I still had no concrete proof. The message on her phone had stirred my worst fears, but without more information, I was left in limbo. At work, I could barely focus. My colleagues noticed immediately. "Ryan, you look like you didn't sleep at all. What's going on?" My co-worker, Sarah, asked with concern. I waved her off with a forced smile. "Just a rough night, that's all." But internally, I was unraveling. My mind kept going back to the text message, the changed phone password, and Emily's odd behavior. I needed answers, and I needed them soon. That night, Emily left for her shift again, or so she said. But after she left, I couldn't sit idly by any longer. I had to know where she was going and what was really happening. So, I made a decision. I would follow her. I waited for about 20 minutes after she left, then grabbed my car keys and headed out. My hands were shaking as I drove, adrenaline coursing through me. I had never imagined myself in a situation like this, but there I was following my own wife to uncover the truth. It didn't take long to catch up to her car. She wasn't driving toward the hospital as I expected. Instead, she took a different route, heading toward a residential area on the other side of town. I stayed far enough behind to avoid detection, but close enough to keep her in sight. After several minutes, she pulled into the driveway of a house I didn't recognize. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her get out of the car. A man was waiting for her at the door. They exchanged a quick hug, and then she followed him inside. The sight of them together hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My mind went blank as I watched the woman I had loved and trusted for years walk into another man's house. I parked a few blocks away, sitting in my car, my thoughts a chaotic swirl of disbelief and anger. I had my answer now. Emily was cheating on me. The late nights, the excuses, the distance between us, it all made sense. But as much as I wanted to storm into that house and confront her, I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to be smart about this. I needed more than just suspicion, I needed solid proof. After what felt like hours, I drove back home, my mind racing with what to do next. Should I confront her directly? Should I gather more evidence first? Every scenario ran through my head, but nothing seemed right. I was too angry, too hurt to think clearly. Emily returned home much later that night, just as she always did, pretending as if everything was normal. But I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The woman I had loved and trusted had betrayed me, and now I had to figure out how to deal with the fallout. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling more determined than ever. I had made up my mind. I would confront her, but not until I had everything I needed to ensure she couldn't deny it. I needed undeniable proof, something that would expose the lies and make her face the consequences of her actions. I spent the day making preparations, putting everything in place. I knew the confrontation was going to be messy, but there was no turning back now. I couldn't live like this, drowning in doubt and suspicion. I needed the truth, and I was going to get it. That evening, Emily left again for her supposed night shift. This time, I didn't just follow her, I was prepared. I had a small camera hidden in my car, ready to capture whatever I needed. My hands were steady now, the anger inside me focused into determination. You just need to subscribe and like to hear different stories every day. She followed the same route as the night before, heading back to that same house. I parked a block away, out of sight, and watched as she once again met the man at the door. This time, they kissed briefly before going inside. My heart sank, but I didn't allow myself to break down. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the camera and quietly approached the house, keeping to the shadows. There was a window at the side of the house, slightly ajar, and through it, I could hear voices. Emily's voice, clear and familiar, and the man's deeper tone. The conversation was casual at first, but it soon became intimate, laced with laughter and flirtation. My stomach churned, but I kept my composure, recording the interaction from outside. I knew this was the evidence I needed, but it was hard to listen to. Every word, every laugh, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. As I recorded, the man said something that caught my attention, something that made my blood run cold. I can't believe we've gotten away with this for so long. Doesn't your husband suspect anything? Emily laughed softly. He has no clue. He's too wrapped up in his own work. As long as I keep playing the exhausted night shift nurse, he'll never figure it out. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my emotions in check. This was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just an affair, she was actively deceiving me, laughing at my trust, taking advantage of my faith in her. I couldn't listen anymore. I had the proof I needed. With my hands shaking, I turned off the camera and quietly made my way back to the car. My mind was racing, but one thing was clear: I was going to confront her tonight. I drove home, trying to calm myself. I didn't want to explode in anger, even though every fiber of my being was burning with rage. I wanted to stay in control, to make her understand the depth of her betrayal. When Emily finally returned home later that night, I was waiting for her. She walked in, acting as if everything was normal, but I could barely stand to look at her. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked up, surprised. "What's going on?" "Sit down." I gestured toward the couch. She hesitated, then slowly sat down, sensing something was wrong. I didn't say anything at first. I just pulled out my phone and played the recording. Her eyes widened in shock as she heard her own voice, laughing about how I would never figure out her affair. Her face went pale, and she quickly stood up, backing away from me. "Ryan," she started, but I cut her off. Don't even try to lie to me." My voice shook with barely controlled anger. "I followed you. I know everything." Tears filled her eyes, and she shook her head. "It's not what you think, not what I think," I yelled, unable to hold back anymore. "You've been cheating on me for months, Emily. You've been lying to me, laughing at me behind my back, and you want to tell me it's not what I think." She collapsed onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I stood there, watching her cry, feeling a mix of fury and sadness. Part of me wanted to walk out, leave her there, but another part of me wanted answers. I needed to know why she did this, how long it had been going on, and what I had done to deserve this. "How long, Emily? How long has this been going on?" she sobbed, shaking her head. "It started a few months ago. I don't know why, it just happened." "That's not good enough," I said through clenched teeth. "You had a choice, Emily. You chose to betray me, and now we're done." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Ryan, don't leave me. I'll do anything to fix this. I made a mistake, but I still love you." I shook my head, feeling a cold sense of finality. "It's too late for that. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." Emily collapsed into sobs, pleading with me to give her another chance, but I was already emotionally checked out. The woman I had loved for years was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. As she cried, all I could feel was the overwhelming weight of betrayal pressing down on me. "I'm done, Emily," I said quietly, looking at her one last time. "There's nothing left to fix." Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't stay there any longer. I turned and walked out the door, letting it close behind me. Each step away from our home felt like a release, like a burden slowly being lifted from my shoulders. I drove around aimlessly for a while, my mind still racing, trying to process everything that had happened. How had things gotten this bad? I replayed moments from our marriage, wondering if there had been signs I'd missed, if I could have done something differently. But no matter how hard I tried to think it through, the answer was always the same: Emily had made her choice, and I couldn't change that. The next morning, I met with a divorce lawyer. The proof I had gathered, the recordings, the messages, was more than enough to ensure the process would be swift. Emily wouldn't be able to contest it. I didn't want anything from her, just a clean break, an end to the lies and deceit. Over the next few weeks, the divorce proceedings moved quickly. Emily tried to reach out a few times, but I ignored her. There was nothing left to say. I'd already made up my mind, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into the mess she had created. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. Emily moved out, taking only a few of her things, leaving behind the life we had built together. The house felt emptier than ever, but in a way, it was also a relief. I no longer had to pretend everything was fine. I no longer had to question her every move. For a while, I struggled with the silence. The quiet nights alone felt like a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few months. But over time, I began to find a sense of peace. I started focusing more on my work, pouring my energy into my career. I even picked up old hobbies I had abandoned during the marriage, things that made me feel like myself again. Months passed, and slowly, I started to rebuild my life. The pain of Emily's betrayal faded with time, replaced by a new sense of strength and independence. I had survived the storm, and now I was moving forward. One evening, as I sat in my now peaceful home, I reflected on everything that had happened. It hadn't been easy, but I had learned something important. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, there's no going back. But life goes on, and in the end, it's up to us to decide how we rebuild. As I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street, I realized I was ready for whatever came next. Emily was part of my past, but my future was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful.